Good afternoon, all. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the event Measuring the Circular Economy, which is the first in a series of NICER programme seminars focusing on some of the key cross-cutting areas of importance.
Recording in progress.
I'm just going to ask if you could all pop yourselves on mute if you haven't already. I'm getting some audio disturbance. That's great. Thank you very much. So my name's Fiona Charnley, and along with Peter Hopkinson, who's also here, I'm co-director of the Circular Economy Hub. And today we have got a fantastic lineup of speakers to introduce you to. But before we start, I wanted to go over some housekeeping points. So we are recording this event and it will be made available via the Circular Economy Hub website. So if you do not wish to be included within that recording, please keep yourselves off camera. As I mentioned, please keep your microphones on mute for the duration of the event, particularly while our guests are speaking. We will have an opportunity for you to come on and ask some questions towards the end of the event. Please add any questions that you have or you wish to ask our speakers in the chat box during their presentations, and there will be time after the presentations for a few of these questions, but we will have a larger discussion and time for Q&A towards the end of today's session. So we're going to kick off with a welcome and an introduction to the NICER programme. I'm then going to hand over to Professor Peter Hopkinson, who is going to set the scene for this afternoon by highlighting some of the circular economy data and measurement challenges. We're then going to hear from Professor Markus Zils on building a circular economy data observatory. And then Professor John Barrett from the University of Leeds is going to join us to talk about the role and application of national material accounts. We're then going to have a short break, followed by a presentation from Professor Raymond Bluchwich on the role and application of macroeconomic modelling for aggregate circular economy analysis. And then finally, we're going to be joined by Dr. Andy Rees from the Welsh Government, talking about creating a dashboard for circular economy policy monitoring and intervention. We'll then have a final break, and then, as I mentioned, we will open up to a panel discussion and time for question and answers. So many of you who are joining us will know about the NICER programme, but just for those of you who are perhaps new to the programme, I wanted to give you a quick introduction. So the NICER programme, NICER stands for National Interdisciplinary Circular Economy Research Programme, and it's the largest UKRI investment to date, which focuses on accelerating and upscaling the circular economy in terms of research and innovation. So it's a £30 million investment, and it's split across 5 national interdisciplinary circular economy research centres, each focusing on a particular resource flow, as you can see on this graphic here. And that is integrated by a circular economy hub, which aims to coordinate, scale and add value to the programme as a whole. The programme also includes £2.5 million worth of Innovate UK funding that focuses on SME research and development, and the call for that has just been announced. So if you're interested in that, we can pop the link to that call in the chat. Importantly, the programme is supported by all UK research councils and has a significant involvement from the policy community involving DEFRA, BEIS and other devolved administrations. So the programme is 4 years in length, and it was launched in January this year, and it initially consists of 34 of the UK's leading universities, but a key aim of the programme is to grow the circular economy community through a significant programme of outreach and collaboration, so that extends across the industrial and policy landscape. And so the Circular Economy Hub, which Peter and myself are leading, we are coordinating activities to ensure that the centres are working together effectively and, importantly, sharing knowledge and expertise, minimising duplication and maximising the outreach and impact of the programme as a whole. The Circular Economy Hub also brings together the wider community of academics, industrial practitioners, policymakers and civil society to collaborate on salient cross-cutting enablers to accelerate and scale up circular economy implementation. And to complement the Circular Economy Research Centre programmes, which focus on specific resource flows, the Hub has its own research programme, including the development of a knowledge platform, a data observatory and a roadmap to provide the underpinning evidence, tools and methods necessary for a UK transition towards a circular economy. So some of our work to date has involved understanding what the key challenges to circular economy implementation are. And so I'm now going to hand over to Professor Peter Hopkinson, who's going to introduce the topic of data and measurement in more detail and explain why it's so important within the context of a circular economy. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Fiona. I've only got 3 slides you'll be pleased to hear. So thanks for that introduction and welcome to everybody. We've had a very good response to the event, and we've got a number of representatives from the individual centres that Fiona's just described here today, so that's fantastic as well. Anybody who's been working in the circular economy for any period of time will know that once you start to discuss it in detail, that the measurement question comes up, and those questions vary from stakeholder to stakeholder. So if you're in the policy space, if you're in industry, if you're academic, if you're part of a wider society, then you may want to ask particular questions of the type that are on this slide. And this is just, just a snapshot. So as part of the NICER programme, we've undertaken extensive discussions and engagement, as well as our own research and reading around the circular economy. And these are the sorts of questions that we get asked all the time. And of course, one of the big difficulties is they're so varied and so wide-ranging that it's often very difficult to respond to those in a short and concise way. And there's a lot of challenges that lie behind those questions if you want to provide a meaningful answer. So what we've done today, and this is really just the start of a process of building up a circular economy observatory that we're going to talk about later. And we brought together 4 speakers to lay the foundation for thinking about what we would call the national aggregate macro layer. We can't cover everything in one event. There will be other events to follow this on other topics related to the measurement challenge. But we wanted to start by looking at what can we do with existing data sets or existing approaches to answer some of these questions, and what does that mean and what does that look like? So Fiona, am I in control of my slides, or can you yeah, thanks very much. So if those are the questions, what are the answers? And when we start to look at the answer, we realize there's a lot of data and measurement challenges. And again, many of you will be familiar with these. There's many sources of data. And once you go into the data to ask questions about the circular economy, they're often very fragmented, incomplete, difficult to access. And there's many tools, methods, and approaches. There's a need to think about measurement at different scales. How do you ensure social and environmental impacts are included, even those areas that are difficult to measure? And how do you model systemic intervention? So if circular economy is a systems perspective, how do you ensure that you retain the measurement of the impact of any intervention on the system as a whole? And for today, we're interested in the viewpoints of different stakeholders. So if those questions that I put on the previous slide don't cover some of the areas of your interest, do put them in the chat box, which we can then take away and add to our database of questions and challenges and sort of work through those over the next few weeks. So final slide, Fiona, please. So we set out when we put together our proposal, which was to create a circular economy data observatory to address the types of questions and challenges listed previously and many more. And we're not going to be able to do everything in the time period that we've got, but we're going to set out the framework and put in place some of the building blocks and collaborate with like-minded partners to go as far as we can, but to create something that we can continue to add to over and beyond the work of the NICER programme. So today is really a first step in bringing together expert groups with common interests to identify and promote areas that you're working in and you found to be good practice, best evidence, best tools, best data, etc. so that we can synthesize those into an easy to access online observatory. And when I say it's the first step, what I mean by that is that we're wanting to build up several outputs. The first is a consultative document, which we call a UK circular economy data strategy. You know, how do we put all this together in a form that people can reference and input into? We want to build a prototype circular economy observatory between now and March, and continue to build that up over time once we're satisfied that we've got the right infrastructure and architecture. We want to undertake some simple case studies using signature products and resource flows from within the programme and elsewhere to illustrate the approach and to quantify the size of the opportunity. And most importantly, we want to build a community of collaborators to define and refine user needs. So we're doing that now. We've been doing it to date, and we want to continue to do that. So the first speaker that we're going to introduce is Markus Zils, who's not only a member of the Circular Economy Hub, but he's also working with the Met for Tech Centre. Some of you will know him from other work that he's done and other presentations that he's done. But I've asked him with Fiona to do a short piece on what we mean by a data observatory, and to give a very simple story based around a particular product. So it's just an example to illustrate some of the approaches we might use and some of the challenges that we face, and to gain your feedback and build the case for a circular economy data observatory. So I'm going to control the slides. I will look for Markus's slides here. Hang on, that's not quite the right slide. No, let's come out of there. Bear with me. Always the challenge when you're let's go from the top. I think this is the right version. Markus, you okay? Are you there?
I'm there. Good afternoon.
Yep, I can hear you. Do you want to kick off?
I don't see the slides yet, Peter.
Oh, hang on. You got those?
Yep, very good.
Right.
Well, thank you and good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to talk to you about the topic that Peter mentioned. I think go to the next page, please. I have prepared 4 very overview discussions. One, sort of why does circular economy matters and how we approach it. The need for taxonomy. As Peter mentioned, it's very important to understand common grounds. And we would like to propose an initial architecture showing one case example, and then I will conclude by showcasing with you what we are aiming to do across the centers as we move forward. On the next page, please, we see that the concept of a circular economy is actually quite intuitive. So there are many visuals around that show what is possible. But as Peter mentioned on the next page, we get a lot of questions, and they're very far-ranging. They talk about systems definitions, that talk about if I do X, Y, Z, how will it affect the outcome? There are questions around environmental footprint, social justice. There's many sort of different dimensions to this. And when we wanted to find a way on seeing why do we need this for, on the next page, we thought that it's very much trying to understand at the centers will create innovations and recommendations. There's so many different knobs to turn, dials to turn, and make very different choices on how to calibrate the system. Initiatives will go into the economy, the UK one, the global economy, and we will be able, or we should be able to observe how does the economy react to these innovations and the recommendations. And therefore, the idea of the Circular Economy Observatory is to understand measuring points that allows us to understand the linkage between initiatives, recommendations, and the final outcome, ex post by visualizing it, but also ex ante potentially trying to understand what are simulation-based inputs for driving us forward. So this was very much the approach that we've taken to define what the Circular Economy Observatory should be doing. In order to facilitate this on the next page, I would like to introduce two perspectives. There are many, many forms on how we could actually transform different dimensional taxonomies. We've picked two, which we find are relevant to the previous picture that we've seen on turning knobs, seeing how the economy will react. And then the first one is on the next page, that we think that there are three stages of any circular economy initiative, be it at the micro or macro level, which we need to be able to describe. The first one is looking at the current state of the linear value chain and what are the current pain points, what is basically the baseline in terms of volume and value, what is the baseline in terms of environmental externalities, social dimensions, etc. Then we think that it's important to understand what type of measures, initiatives are being applied to the system, be it design, be it reverse logistics, be it business model, be it enablers, to really understand at initiative level what's going to happen, in order then to see on the target stage, how would that system then be more circular, how would flows of materials, flows of value be reconnected to source or some other parts of the value chain, and being able to quantify that in economic terms, in environmental terms, and also in social terms. So it's very much the view that having a segmentation by stage of development is very critical. The second lens, which we think is very important, is on the next page, is acknowledging the fact that you can discuss circular economy at very different levels. So the basic level, we talk about a material-based economy, which aims at closing the loop on materials to avoid leakage across the value chain. So material stocks and flow analysis is very critical, and that very much forms the basis for LCAs and other type of activities. In order to change the flow of materials, we need activities. We need to do interventions that require people and entities to do things differently, collecting more, refurbishing more, having different usage models. So we believe that having an economic activity lens is very important, because that drives on the next level what type of value add goes along with this, what type of cost is required, what type of margin can you generate, etc. And this then can be aggregated into different type of sector perspectives, which then can be formed part of an MRIO sort of input-output analysis, which John will talk about later. And that can be informed policy and strategy. So we think that is the second very important lens to understand that there are very different layers at which you can measure the baseline, the interventions, and also the outcome. With this set, on the next page, I would like to showcase you a very specific case example. And we're going to look at, on the next page, on rare earth magnets, which are used in very many applications. And we've taken the drivetrain as an example. And we have taken this because we think that while we have all the centers focusing on different material streams, at the end, it's the entity of a product that actually travels through the economy and will drive utility. And there will be a need to understand product-specific applications, which then can be sourced back to the material composition. And on the next page, we can show that certain materials sit in specific applications, and you can take them apart. And again, these parts that you see here, you can take further apart into the material content, etc. So having a signature product focus application will allow us to decompose it into the material streams, but also talk to the different value add that we need. On the next page, what we've tried to do is come up with a generic enough taxonomy around value chain steps and activities, so that we can quantify the specific changes along the system. And we've taken here this rare earth electric magnet, which goes from an ore into oxides, it's getting processed into magnetic alloys, it becomes a component, enters the electric motor, and then becomes part of an ensemble here, an electric vehicle. And as you see on top, there's basically different activities which you can find in this fashion or similar in almost any of the manufacturing products or consumer products that are being driven. And typically what we also see that there are different actors involved. Now this part of the value chain, the inbound flow of the linear economy, is very well understood. If you then go to the next page, we ask the question, how could you extend that diagnostic framework to also account for the need of the circular economy, which aims at capturing different parts of the construction, the ensemble, the car, the electric motor, the magnets, the alloys back. And at each stage of taking this on the reverse cycle back into its components, we see different options to bring materials and embedded energy, labor, etc. back into usage. And that's very much sort of the proposal to use such a framework to describe on what can be done. So on the next page, we also tried to understand what is the linear base case. And in the case of the electric motor magnet component, right now is hardly any real value in or real volume is being used in recycling, alloy recycling, metal recycling. This is right now a very linear part. And as we said earlier, the inbound is quite well understood. There's plenty of data available, but what we are very much concerned about is on the reverse side. That's where we think that there's a distinctive need to put measures in place to understand at what cost, at what value, at what externalities you can actually bring materials back. On the next page, we say if we have such a framework, then pinpointing a lot of the barriers, it becomes possible. Why is this set up so linear as we've seen this in the past still today? And by understanding these different type of inhibitors, the different type of barriers, that can stimulate a couple of ideas on how to take such a system more circular. And that is on the next page. Then the idea to form very specific answers around design, processing, enablers, and business models to find initiatives which can be mapped to certain actors along the value chain. For instance, if you would be able to tag material better, potentially at the end of use, it would be easier to identify them. If you would have the right separation technologies for these type of products, it would be easier to extract components at the material content. If you would potentially have a very different business model, the usage time of this vehicle could be extended. So it's very important to understand what type of measure, what type of initiative is mapped against what part of the value chain. And what we propose then on the next page is really the heart of what we think the Circular Economy Observatory should aim to do. On the one hand, it can start tracking different activities across the stakeholders, the from and to stage, what are basically the progress against certain targets initiatives. And at the output level, at systems level, we will be able to measure the shifts in the underlying quantities of the biophysical flows. We can measure the difference in resource productivity on the activities. We can also then aggregate this on towards the sector level perspective. And all this was looking at the value part, but also at the environmental, sustainability and social dimensions of the discussion. And that's, we feel, could be a way of standardizing and putting a taxonomy in place that would allow us to measure the progress of a system by looking at the input in the program level, but also looking at the system's output level very consistently. Then on the next page, Peter, the question is now, how can we and how could we propose to move forward on the circular economy centers front? So what we have looked into at the next page, very much sort of the current representation, the current visualization of the different centers, and all of the centers deploy some type of representation at the material flow and activity-based level, so that we feel very comfortable on the next page that there should be enough common ground to find different elements. And we find this is therefore important because while we have in the centers a very much material focus, a lot of the materials will get interwoven as they mature into components and products and into final usage over time. And then very much the revalorization options that are currently available, landfilling, recycling, incineration, a lot of the material streams across different products will come together. So we think that there is a huge opportunity to find synergies on how to actually build the fact base, the methods, and also the data sources to populate such a virtual observatory. And that leads on to the last page. taking our previous two lenses, the layers and also this from-to discussion, we think that there is a huge opportunity to join forces in aggregating different type of data, making them available across the different centers, and also for looking this at the macroeconomic level. And this is very much sort of where John, I think, will take up the next conversation, that moving on from the material flow to economic activities, there's a good opportunity to link this also to the macroeconomic input-output analysis. This was a very quick introduction on what we are hoping to achieve together with the centers in the National Observatory site.
Great, thanks, Markus. How are we doing for time, Fiona? Are we on track?
Yeah, we are. We've got time for a couple of questions.
Okay. I've got a couple in here, Markus. Mike Tregent. So Mike, thanks for that. So Mike is, within the current economic model, how do we counter the barrier associated with margins that are too small to support or initiate circularity? So often those products and material flows with low residual value in the current system. Markus, how would you respond to that?
No, I think that's indeed a very important question. And what we've seen in previous analysis is that given that we go through many different hands and that potentially people need to make a margin at each of the steps, creating the value across the system. So by actually reducing the cost of raw materials right in the upstream by recycling or by taking use, somebody has a benefit. And trying to share that created margin is one of the core elements. But in order to see how that can be done, it's very important to actually start measuring it in the current stage. And given sort of the value built up in the linear chain, there is substantial margins typically for products which we see in service today. So by thinking about redistributing this innovative business models, we think that there is a great potential to unlock further circularity, even with today's technologies. But it's exactly one of the core questions that the observatory should support to address, on how to identify these opportunities for cross-system trade-offs so that we get out of these low margin traps in certain activities.
And Mike, maybe if you stay on and come back in the afternoon, you might want to follow through with that. And if people have got examples of where, examples where there've been low margins, small margins, but have been shown to be successful for whatever reason, we'd be very interested to hear about that. Equally, those areas where there are low margins, which people have decided just can't be done, we'd also be interested to hear about that. Probably the second question, probably the only question we've got time for in this session, is from Jamin. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So Markus, have you tested the framework, the schema that you presented against other value chains? And if so, how did it stack up? If not, do you have plans to do so?
So we have started to test this with individual centers. That's part of the process we are currently undertaking. We have tested this in other type of projects already. Our sense is that it's fairly robust. Obviously, sort of the differences in how they are cut and how they are named is huge. But we actually believe that this is exactly the opportunity of a taxonomy to find one way of trying to classify that in a certain sense. Typically in the inbound sort of, you have the chemical compound aggregation and you have the mechanical compound aggregation. And that's typically present in any type of value chain that we've seen. I think usage and distribution is fairly similar. It's different, whether it's B2B or B2C. Where we see big differences is the ability to actually disaggregate products at the end of use. And that's where we see there is the biggest need to actually find a common taxonomy. And that's indeed something where we hope that a discussion like today's and the further refinement will allow us sort of to find the right level of granularity so that we can find enough resolution to cater for the individual case, but enough common ground to actually put this into some modeling which allows us to aggregate this at systems level. But it's an important challenge, and so far we are hopeful that we jointly can master it.
Thanks, Joman. If you've got examples of sectors that you think it would be worth testing and validating against, that would be great. We've done work in construction and demolition waste, end-of-life plastics. We've started conversations around other resource flows, and we're not suggesting that what's being presented is the final version. That there are variations, as Markus has indicated. So whatever we do has to be flexible and agile to accommodate those differences. I'm going to finish off just with a comment from Raymond, who is actually going to be speaking later. So Raymond's posted a comment: in time of high commodity prices, brackets doubling last year, material cost savings across manufacturing are beneficial and provide seed money for investments within firms. I think that anybody in the manufacturing sector on the call today will probably totally agree with that. And we've got a number of case studies to show the impact of commodity price increases on the bottom line and what's happening inside particular value chains. So that's great. We're going to close that session down. Do post some comments if you are reflecting on some of the things that Markus had said. The slides will be made available. We'd like to have discussions and consultation with you after the event, either individually or collectively. So there'll be more space for us to do that in due course.